T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Almost get talking about US ARC. How about
Dave, start over, please.
Start over. I always thought we'd go to the US ARC and then we'd go into that.
You went too soon, dude. Watch the countdown. Watch the countdown.
Countdown was over. Okay, do it over.
Go.
All right, guys. New week. We got Finn Russo and Warren Booth on this one. Pretty excited. A couple guys I've known for a long time, interviewed individually, but never together. So let's see what this does. Also, US ARC. Same as every week. Everyone can contribute in their own little way. Find a way to do it, even if it's just paying attention and informing people around you. Everything goes a long way with those guys. Warren will be able to tell you. Everyone can tell you that. But all right, let's get this rolling. All right. How you guys doing this? We're not going to say this morning, but how you guys doing this morning?
Doing good.
It is morning. So.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly thing, but I've had a lot of really great conversations, you guys individually, and every once in a while, I think if I put the right people around each other, it's just gonna have this natural flow. Unless I fail us, this could be the worst conversation we've ever had in our life.
You won't fail.
I'm a little optimistic, but we all have bad days, and
You might fail.
But regardless, so. Kind of a silly way to start. Let's start this way. How are you guys doing right now? It's a good time of the year. A lot of babies are being produced. What are some highlights? We can start with Vin.
Yeah, it's been a good year as far as my snake production. They say in the agricultural world, it's a bumper crop. So hopefully it continues. But obviously I do this for a living. So if I don't make babies, then I can't survive. So this is all I do. So the babies are coming, which is great. Now feed them and sell them. So,
okay, good on you, man. Warren, everything going okay over there with you guys?
Yeah, I just had my last litter a couple of days ago. So this year I produced Anaconda Phase Emerald, 3 Boas, Venezuelan, Russian Burgeri, a couple of litters, maybe 3 litters of Costa Rican T-positive stuff, Dunn's Pythons, Brazilian Rainbows, and then T-positive, the European line children's pythons, and a bunch of leopard geckos with my son. I think that's
leopard geckos.
It's been a good year. Yeah. What was that?
You said leopard geckos?
Yeah. So I got into leopard geckos. They were the first reptile I kept 30 something years ago, and over the years I got out of them. But my son, for the last year and a half, or maybe 2 years, has been really into them. And I told him, Dylan's turning 8. Later this year, but I said, look, if you're really into it, you show me you're into it, I'll get you a leopard gecko, or we can get leopard geckos. And my wife was talking about getting him a leopard gecko. Of course, I had bigger plans for it. It wasn't going to be one leopard gecko. So Dylan got 4 leopard geckos worth about $2,000, and he's been breeding them. He's got 12 babies hatched already. He's got 6 more eggs in the incubator, and he's loving it. And he's learning, as a 7.5-year-old, learning Mendelian genetics, polygenetic traits, sex determination. So he's doing really well. And it's got me into leopard geckos again, which is kind of fun.
I love that, man. It's a lot of instant gratification because there's just really good production, constant flow. Like you said, the babies look great. Have you guys done anything like tweaking the incubator at, what is it, like day 45? You heat it up a little bit and they get a little more colorful?
No, we haven't done that, but we do have 2 incubators. I normally have 1, so we bought a second so that you can have females hatching in one and males in the other, but we haven't played around with it yet. We want to see what it produces just on the standard male-female temperatures, and then we'll play around. But some of the stuff's really cool. It's I've been really impressed by it. Whether it sells or not, that's another thing. But any money that he makes goes into a bank account that he can't touch until he's 18.
That's awesome. I'm always really jealous when I talk to guys in the hobby. I talked to Adam Chesla, and I believe, if I remember right with Adam Chesla, I think he said he kind of got going with bearded dragons when he was like in his early teens or mid-teens and just kind of evolved from there. And I don't know if my life would be any better if I knew about breeding reptiles when I was 14 years old, but it would have been cool learning that through high school. I would have paid attention to certain classes more in high school if I knew what I'd be doing for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think I was like 15 or 16 whenever I started keeping reptiles.
Okay.
Before that, it was aquarium fish. It was bettas. I used to keep and breed Sammy's fighting fish. But then I got into snakes, and that was the end of it. There was nothing else from then on.
No.
My first snake was a boa.
Oh yeah, mine was a Western hognose snake.
I was 14 or 15.
Yeah. I did buy a boa when I was 8, but at no point did I understand what I was doing with it as soon as it got bigger than 3 feet. My father wasn't really a snake guy. My mom didn't really care about snakes. So the moment we realized feeding it 2 large rats a week was not a good thing, and we had this like 7-foot long animal, and I was like 80 pounds and like 11 years old, that was the end. I think we found like, like always in the hobby, we found some random local guy in the newspaper. We ended up going to his house. He had this absolutely dingy house with like 20 or 30 tanks in it, just a different thing in every tank. And he was more than happy to take our big boa off our hands. God, I don't even know what year that had been. I guess that would have been like early 90s. No, yeah, it'd probably been like 97, I want to say, for a thing like that. But no, I same as you, Vin. I just found boas to be a lot more fascinating as a kid. And it was only $129, which is crazy because I think boas have been $129 my entire life at a pet store. But saved a little, got it. It was a fun learning experience. My cousins used to make fun of me because I'd bring it downstairs to their house and I'd put it on the bed, and then all of a sudden the snake would get fucking angry about something, start hissing, scaring everybody, and they'd always say, like, I'd tear my shirt off, throw it on top of it, get on top of it, wrangle it up, take it back upstairs. But an 8-year-old with a boa constrictor was probably the worst idea ever.
Yeah. Stick with leopard geckos when you're 8.
That's it. So, Dave, what about your year? How's it been?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, my year kind of finished early for boas. I talked to Vin a lot about my crazy breeding year I have, but with me moving in January, I kind of really got everybody going in like early August this year to get as many ovulations on the ground. Good thing I did it that way. The bad news about my season is my off-season litters. I just had my 4th litter in the last 4 weeks. Slug out, and a girl got bound up. Got her to pass everything. She's okay. First slug just bound her up. There was a couple live babies, but all the breeding I did when I moved and reintroduced males for females that started developing in January gave me slug outs, and the other ones reabsorbed. That may have been a little bad luck. That may have been me not knowing to just not keep going after the move. It was only like 30 minutes down the road, so I didn't think it was going to be like crazy, but I think the male I think it was mostly the males weren't doing their job at that point.
Yeah, but, remember that with snakes, the males produce sperm 1 time a year, right? So once they use it up. So if the female's not ready, and boas do not store sperm very well. Pythons do. Pit vipers really do, but boas are terrible at storing sperm. So be aware that and given that boas tend to have this prolonged courting period, if they get it all done early before the female's ready, you got a good chance of getting a lot of slugs or pretty crappy babies.
So preparing for that, but 2 things on that actually. And there was a little bit, I'm not going to say there wasn't luck involved in this, but there was definitely luck involved in this. When I was living in North Carolina about 10 years ago, I only had about, mid-20 range of bows in the collection, but I had a real lack of males. I took one male, it was a male I produced myself from some of the original Tom Burke stuff I got, and it was essentially just a sunglow with a really nice pattern. But I put him on 4 females over the calendar year, and I got a perfect litter, a perfect litter, a perfect litter, And then the last litter of the year was a complete disaster, a couple deformed babies, a lot of slugs. But that was over about a 9-month period. And what I was doing is that was when I was kind of experimenting with food cycling. I was feeding the one girl to breed. I introduced the male, started getting early locks, got an early ovulation, took the male out, let him chill for a little bit, started the food cycling with the other female, I think like 2 or 3 weeks prior to that, put the male in, got a lock. The third one, I don't think there was any food cycling involved in that one. I just happened to introduce. I think I got lucky on the window. Or I can't say for sure, but maybe I noticed her hugging the cool side. But I only had the male in, I want to say, for 30 days tops with each female, and I got a lot done. But again, I think there was a lot of luck involved in that. So when you're talking about like sperm with the males, so certain times of the year the sperm count's just higher, or just
they produce it. Spermatogenesis occurs at pretty much one time a year, and that's when they produce all of the sperm that they're going to use that year. So it's not like mammals where they're continually producing sperm. So they produce it, and then once that's gone, it's gone. Which is why, for example, I think there's a lot of issues with things like Sanzinia breeding. With the green Sanzinia, you get a lot of litters that are lots of slugs and very few offspring, and I think the males have been introduced too early. So I think, it's if given the courting period, if the males start breeding the female too early, the female system stores sperm very well. It'll degrade in the female.
You can see when the male's sperm is available. Their hemipenes are engorged.
Yeah.
So like from the anal plate to the tip of the tail. Normally during like the summer when they're feeding, it's thin. It's like a thinner part. But then as the cooler nights come around, you'll see that they'll get like it'll look like it's filled with water. Their hemipenes engorge, and that's when they're most likely producing sperm. So it also depends on your temperature cycling and your feed cycling. So if you're keeping a male boa warm constantly and you're feeding him constantly, he might not get to that point. But if he does get to that point, which is what you're trying to achieve, it depends on where you're keeping them. Again, how cool it gets at night. So there's so many different compensating factors. And I agree with Warren that sperm shot, for me, it's usually good for one female, maybe two if I'm lucky. But I feel like once they let a load out, then trying to get them to do it again is. And Dave, your method is probably the best way. Wait a little while, give them time to regenerate. And if they're still in that spermatogenesis cycle, then they could probably do two, maybe three females. But that's the exception. That's not the rule. That's luck.
And I started that conversation with luck because I honestly believe it was luck, because what I knew 10 years ago was a lot less than what I knew now. And
right.
If we had this conversation now, I'd be talking about how I used an ultrasound, how the ultrasound told me to do everything I'm doing right now. And, it's really weird. Tony Antonucci was probably one of the first guys that really introduced ultrasounding, or like really I paid a lot of attention to what he was doing. And, he had success and he had failures because, again, it's boa breeding. With the ultrasound for me now, like this collection, I've mentioned to you a lot, Finn, it doesn't cycle together. And it's not just because of locality stuff. It's
you.
Yeah, it might. Well, here's the thing. Yes and no, it could be me.
Well, you move them when you move snakes, it really messes up their biological clock. So you've moved them a few times in the last few years. So for me, it takes them 2 to 3 seasons to get into synchronization with your seasonality, maybe more. Yeah. So moving them around, if you're going to move them, you've got to move them at a time when they're not in a feeding cycle or a breeding cycle. So you got to do it when it's somewhere in between. And you've got to match the environment you take them from to where you bring them to. You have to match it exact temperature-wise. And again, moving their enclosures, meaning if they're in a rack system and you put them in a vision cage with sliding glass doors, that messes them up, because then they're in a fishbowl. They're like, where am I? You know, they're used to being hidden back in a rack, and then all of a sudden they're in a big cage. So that messes their clock up too. There's lots of little things. So you've, not to say you did it on purpose, but you had to move. And every time you moved, you threw off the cycles, and they weren't all on the exact same cycle, you know?
No. And, part of this collection, again, with my old partner, is a little hodgepodge. Some of these animals he acquired as adults from other breeders. Luckily I'm kind of at this position now where I've held back enough over the years that I almost have this next gen coming up, and it's all going to kind of happen in a 2-year cycle. But in that same conversation we're having, and here's the thing, they could be complete failures. I had 2 ovulations this past month. One was for a Marin Project animal. I know I had to do it. They wanted it. But one was
I'm
for
shaking my head because I personally would never have an ovulation in July.
Yeah. Well, so on top of that, I have an ovulation in July, and I have a female I produced in the house years ago. Warren, we talked about this one. I bred a blood albino to a labyrinth female. She gave me all slugs, 1 Partho baby, and 1 live labyrinth female. I held the labyrinth female back. She is actually posting at 26 millimeters right now, and she was at 16 millimeters, I want to say, I think it was 35 days ago. I've had a lot of courtship. The male was a virgin that I put in with her. But that animal in that rack system is the only one that, in my opinion, was mature enough size-wise and started developing. Now, the only other thing in that room that started developing were my Hondurans. My Costa Ricans. My visual male, and I have 2 double head females that are at the very bottom of the CB70 rack. I wasn't going to breed them. I just, with me moving and all that. Now, when I put the ultrasound on them, I want to say 2 months ago, literally both females are at 18 millimeters sitting side by side in a rack system. I did introduce the male because I've never done it before, and I really wanted to see a Costa Rican someday. But inevitably, there was a little courtship. Male actually went off feed kind of like a month or 2 prior to the females developing, or honestly seeing them in the same area. Maybe he was picking up in that early development, but I've separated them. I kind of hemmed and hawed over a month by rotating to see if he liked one more than the other, and then I stopped. And when I ultrasounded yesterday, both females had completely reabsorbed. So I guess I'm kind of just teaching you guys or telling you guys something right now, but I love the ultrasound because I've never been able to manage this hodgepodge of a boa collection without this ultrasound.
Yeah, I've never had one. I was always just going by the female, the way I feed them, the way I cycle them. And then if anything, I'll palpate, but even then it's very rare.
I just palpate and run through my hands. I can feel the follicles when they're like the size of between a tic tac and a marble. You could feel them. Yeah. They're there, So and again, I'm like Warren. I have a very, very strict seasonality that I go on. That the boas, they will not ovulate in the middle of the summer. Are the eggs present? Yeah, the eggs are present. If I had an ultrasound and I wanted to look for eggs, I'd find them in every female in the building. But in order to get them to mature properly, they have to go through the feeding cycle, the non-feeding cycle, the temperature cycling. And once that's achieved, then I watch them to see, when they need a male around, and I'll palpate them then, and I'll feel, eggs developing, and then I'll put males with them. But for me, an ultrasound it's a good tool for somebody who's not really cycling their animals. Because, you can have boa litters all year round, obviously. I'd rather have them in a season so they're all on the same playing field. I can't have boas all year round. I mean, if something ovulates now, you're having babies in December, it's like it's the middle of the winter. They wouldn't have the proper, in my building, they wouldn't have the proper temperature gradients to be grab it and carry a litter,
So I do have the back So the back is around 82 degrees, and I always have it set around 82. Sometimes I'll drop it a little lower, but honestly, with the new heating and cooling system on my building, it really has to work hard to do what it needs to do. Yes, it keeps the temperatures there, but when the wall thermostat says it's set at 82 or 83, all my other little thermometers in the building will probably say around like 80 to 81 because that cold air is blowing to try to keep it down to about 82 or 83. So I don't necessarily have a heat spike, and I was fortunate in the other building too where I had a really good heating and cooling system. So unless there was a mistake made on my part, I didn't really have crazy spikes. So like I said, if I get these next 2 litters, what I just did give me 2 slug outs, the off-season thing's a little bit of a joke. Maybe I should really dial back on it. But I have had December litters. Like my fire motley female gives me babies every year around December. So I have to breed her off season because if I don't, I will not get a litter from her.
Wow.
Now, the one thing I have noticed is if I give a female a 2-year break, I can reset her schedule. And I can do that with the ball python too.
You can reset the clock. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, if I had anything good to show for it out of these last 4 litters and it didn't just come off like me being a little greedy, but also when I was breeding was kind of around the time a lot of other people around me were breeding. And my litters, I started getting in March this year. I think for like Colombians, I hit the ground a little bit earlier than most other people in the hobby. And my season, again, was wrapped up by April. So, I don't know.
You remember also that whenever your females are off-season cycling, the males might not be. Right. So, you could have a female producing, because also remember this, that a female will mature and regress ova throughout the year. Right. So because she's maturing ova a month ago, doesn't mean that she needs to ovulate. If they regress, it means that in January they could mature follicles again. It's not going to have to wait until this time next year for them to mature again.
Yeah, that's why I was saying the eggs are there.
They're always present.
Yeah, you need and again, if you've got a sonogram and you're looking for them, you're going to find them all year round. Doesn't mean you need to put the male with them and breed them. So for me, it's more, like Warren was talking about too. It's more temperature and feeding than just the eggs being present. Yeah.
Understandable. And now, just to put it in perspective, yes, they are always there. 6 millimeters is usually where you're going to see them at, especially after reabsorbing. Sometimes they'll be 6 to 8. Then at some point, you'll notice they bump up to 10. A female could sit at 10 millimeters for 3 months without any movement whatsoever. And then sometimes can go the opposite way, or all of a sudden it'll bump up to 14 to 16, I find. Normally when I see that bump up is around the time that I want to try to get an early male in, or at least somebody to start courtship. Because that's another thing I was going to ask just opinion on. So we always talk about this really long courtship in boas. Is it long courtship, or is it the male not wasting his time on a female that isn't really developing the way that it needs to?
Well, I think the male is part of is one of the reasons that ova mature is the presence of being around a reproductive male.
The presence of a male, yeah.
Yeah, you see this in rattlesnakes as well. Males will do this long courtship with rattlesnakes. They'll be with them for weeks or months. It could be mate guarding, which is more than anything trying to prevent the males being present. But they take a long time. I've got boas that sometimes they'll go out straight away. Sometimes I'll do the courtship for months before they actually I see a visual lock and I can tell they're developing.
Okay. Now, one thing I have noticed, the reason I bring that up, and again, it's nothing is 100%, but sometimes when I maybe don't realize a female's been developing, she gets a little bit bigger. By the way, Vin, good job on your change of your T-shirt. Well done, bud.
Figured Mike would want that.
But, I lost my train of thought because your awesome T-shirt you're wearing. But so I'm going to go a little side tangent on that. So you're talking about, when we introduce the male, of course, that's going to give that courtship. It's going to put that smell in the air. It's going to make things happen. You guys have your collection in a smaller room. Mm-hmm. Those smells have to travel more than just a couple feet. And by saying that, those animals just simply being in the room with other animals, you don't think that's going to do that? They need to be in the same container together?
I think being in the same container, I think it's not just smells, I think it's stimulation. You know, you'll see the male is spurring female continually. That's not just, you know, that's there for a reason. That will result in hormonal release between female, which will result in, you know, egg maturation or ova maturation and so on. It's all part of the game.
Yeah, then the male and the female tongue flicking, tasting each other. The males wrap up on the females, and you can see they almost squeeze them. You know, and they're spurring, which is like tickling in a way. All of that obviously needs or helps in the ova maturation. So I agree. I mean, that's what I see.
Yeah, it's not like ball pythons where it's one shot and they're done and everything's happy.
Yeah, move on to the next one.
Boas are a little bit more complex, which is why so many people get into boas, thinking they're going to make it rich, and then 6 months or 8 months later, they're out of boas because they realize they're a little bit more complex.
Yeah, there's a lot.
If you work with it and you know what you're doing, then you can do. Then boas can be pretty easy.
There's a lot more moving parts in boas than pythons.
I feel like that was like a cheap shot you just took on me comparing boas to ball pythons, because I work with ball pythons, which is fair. You're right. That's
they work with ball pythons as well.
I have some too.
We all dabble, man. We all dabble.
Well played, Warren. Well played.
But yeah, no, I'm not necessarily trying to reinvent it. I think just the problem with me is, you know, I always like to make the comment about organically growing in the hobby, like, you know, not just like absurdly going after something crazy and then making it work. I was very happy with organic growth. When I was put in a position where I was around somebody who had this absurd idea in his head of what it should be or could be, and let's just buy everybody else's dreams and make them work for us. It did work with some species. With boas, as we know, it didn't. So
I don't think you can buy adult boas and be successful with them.
Never.
You might get 1 or 2 litters out of them, maybe. But
I won't even bother with adults. Every time I get an adult boa, it's a nightmare. And for example, 2 years ago, a friend of mine gave me a boa, a male boa, and a female boa, and I didn't really want it, but there was like some sentimental value behind it, and it belonged to somebody that had passed away. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. I'll breed it, you know. But this snake was 7 years old and had been through like 2 or 3 hands already. It was a little on the thinner side for its age, even though it was quite big. So it means it was fed a lot, then it wasn't fed. So I put it into a breeding, you know, regimen, and fed it for a breeding cycle, bred it, and it looked like it was developing eggs, and then I just found it dead one day. So it's like I don't like getting into getting older animals because it's exactly what I said. You don't know what their history is. You don't know what environment they were living in. All they needed to be was dried out once or twice and living in you know, squalor for a week and breathing in ammonia, and their lungs are burnt, and then you put them into a temperature cycle and they're done, you know. So it's like all of my greatest successes I've had in breeding snakes have been animals I've raised myself, every single one of them. Now, have I raised wild caught animals and bred them? Yes, plenty of them, but those were usually one shot deals, you know, with the wild animals. And it was years of acclimatation to get them going. So I'd prefer to get a wild caught animal than to buy an adult boa from somebody else.
Yeah.
I agree
And
with
wild
that.
caught takes time. You know, the anaconda phase emerald litter I had this year, that female was wild caught. I've had her for 5 years.
Yeah.
I got her fresh out of the wild and established her. But it took 5 years for her to finally cycle to get
exactly.
Yeah.
But I'd rather have that than the pet that was nurtured, neglected, you know.
That's it. Yeah, so whenever I see people buying collections, maybe it clearly works for ball pythons. You just can't sell the babies. But for boas, you know, it takes a lot more work. So when people are talking about buying collections of boas, I think it's you might as well just throw your money down the drain.
It'll be faster and cheaper to start with babies and raise them for 4 years and breed them than to try to acclimate a clunker adult that's been through the meat grinder, you know?
Fed every 7 days on this jumbo rat.
Right. It's so fat. I mean, that's another thing. I got a boa back from a friend. He gave it to me, and I didn't want it again. But it's, you have so many people you're in touch with that they're like, oh, I just take it. I don't know what to do with it. And it was a male boa that was so fat that it couldn't move. So I basically put it on a diet, which was just not feeding it. And it leaned down, and I put it back into a feeding regimen. But that snake never bred anything. Wouldn't even try, you know? So it's like, it's because he was too fat to begin with. And the spermatogenesis just never took place because its body was burning calories constantly, you know?
Yeah. No, I think anybody in Boas knows that. And I think we're going through the phase in the hobby where, I don't mean to sound it to be rude, but ball python money is looking for something else around them that looks like it's doing better than what they're doing. So I have had a lot of new customers show a lot of interest in boas this year because of that. And I feel like this comes in a swing of every like 5 or 6 years. All of a sudden the boa guys get a lot of new people in because, again, other things slow down around them in people's eyes. They watch you guys sell a few boas at a show, or they watch you guys sell a few Woma pythons at a show. Yeah. And they start diversifying. And I don't think there's anything wrong with diversifying, but like you said, ball python mentality, like ball pythons are really easy. You can go out and buy a collection of adult ball pythons, bring them in.
You can breed them tomorrow.
and you're going to do you, man. There was one time that my partner went out and literally threw like 650 new breeder ball pythons in my lap, like August or September. And the crazy thing about that is I got like 459 clutches from like 650 females that got moved in, and I started breeding like a month later.
Yep.
And everything just worked perfectly. Now, it shouldn't have. You would think it shouldn't have. I mean, these animals, I think, traveled 800 miles to get here. So we're talking completely different environment, completely different settings. Now, that might have been the trigger for them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You know, when I was doing ball pythons in large numbers, I loved when people would give me their, neglected female, the big, 4-foot female that was a little thin because they just went away to college and didn't feed it anymore. I'd put it into a feeding regimen, feed it, literally 6 or 7 large rats in a row, put a male with it, and it would lay 8 eggs that year. It's because the ball pythons come from a feast or famine environment. They could have a year or two where there's a drought and there's no food, and they just hide out underground or in termite mounds and wait for food to come. And then they'll gorge themselves and get enough calories to lay eggs. But you can do that in captivity every year. In the wild, that happens every few years,
Yeah. I, same thing with the ball pythons this year. I did breed them early. I figured whatever ovulations I got before I moved was going to be whatever I had on the season. I did get a lot accomplished early with them. I did get a lot of reabsorbing after I moved, but like what you're saying, Vin, I honestly think that I had reabsorbing less because of the move and more because of my feeding schedule after the move.
Right.
My rodent colony kind of like took a little hit when I moved. It took a minute to get them to bounce back. Yes, I did have frozen thaw to offer, but you understand the ball python, it's not always going to go as you want it to. But also at the same time, when I hear people talk about frozen thaw with ball pythons and how they can't ever get their animal to eat, what I'm always thinking is, who cares? Because like you said, feast or famine.
Right.
When they do turn on, man, I usually don't have a huge issue with frozen thawed with females.
Right. They'll eat anything.
Yeah. The males, though.
Yeah.
That's where your live's going to come in.
Yeah.
You got to keep a male ball python going, and sometimes they're going to be a little stingy.
But, when you think of the boas now, because like you said, a lot of ball python people are getting into boas. My advice to them, and they're obviously listening, is start with young ones, start with babies and grow them up. I know I know ball python people are impatient because they can breed ball pythons at 6 months in males and 18 months in females.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen with boas, but it'll be worth the wait if you hold on to boas for 3 or 4 years and breed them, you know. But you got to start with young ones. Don't think you're going to go buy some guy's collection and you're going to be a ball python / boa breeder. It's not going to happen, you know.
And realize it's not going to work in your 55 quart freedom breeders.
Right.
You're going to have to go a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, that's a question because, you know, that's, you know, dwarf boas. You know, that is one thing a lot of people ask about now. You know, the ball python community can be very morph motivated. And with some of the dwarf stuff, we're a little limited. You know, I love what the Hondurans are doing. I love what the Costa Ricans have. You know, the Nicaraguan stuff, if you can find it. Good stuff. Can you keep a dwarf boa even more dwarf? Because, you know, we talk about our Surinams, our Peruvians, me with Colombians. My Colombian females are 5 to 8 pounds and I'm breeding them and 6 to 8 years old now. And every virgin goes their first year when I introduce a male, I find. I'm still getting really nice litter sizes. Some of my 7-pound females gave me over 20 babies this year as virgins. Can you keep like a Costa Rican even smaller than you should, like you do a Colombian?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to feed them so much. I mean, I breed crawl Ks, I breed hog islands, I breed West Snake Ks, the Tarahumaras. They can be, obviously, they're a small snake. And what happens is when people get them and they feed them too much, they look like a ball python. They get short and stubby, like a blood python, and they never breed. So naturally, they've evolved. All of these dwarf boas, and Warren knows about this too. They've segregated a dwarfism gene in a lot of these animals. They've evolved in an environment where they literally eat twice a year. You know, the K boas, migratory birds stop on those islands twice a year, and they try to eat as many as they can. Or if they're small, they might not be able to eat a bigger one. They still got to eat little geckos. So they've evolved eating far less than what people feed them in captivity. So if you fed them once a week for 2 years, they're going to be too fat. It's that simple. So that's the problem with the dwarf boas. I breed dwarf boas in the CB70 trays that I have ball pythons in, especially like the K boas and some of the smaller hogs and the Western AKs and Tarahumaras too. And Belize boas too. The mainland Belize's aren't that really big, but I keep them that way. You know, Eugene used to say, because he knew I was a bonsai artist, he used to say, Vin bonsai's boas. And in bonsai, you're keeping a tree in a pot almost eternally just by simply watering it, pruning its roots every couple of years to make sure it doesn't grow out of the pot, pruning it to keep it a certain size. We're not pruning a boa, but we're feeding it, and we're going to keep it in that natural range. You know, Quetzal Dwyer and Dave Kaufman went to Hog Island a couple months ago and did a YouTube on it. And the largest Hog Island boa they found was what, 3.5 feet?
Yeah,
little
guys.
All small snakes. And some were females. You know, they weren't all males. And that's their natural size, you know? So it's unnatural to keep feeding them. You know, look what we've done with domesticated cattle and horses. There's giant, you know, Clydesdales. They're huge. You step on you, you're dead. I mean, compared to a wild stallion, which is probably a fraction of that size, you know, or even, you know, little ponies. Through domestication, we've gotten things bigger. Dogs, you know, they're breeding mastiffs, 200 pounds. It's ridiculous. So can we keep them small? Yeah. Through proper feeding, you can. But people have a big problem with feeding snakes. They have to feed them. I don't know why.
I won't disagree with that. But here's the thing. I was the same way when I started. Everything had to be on a 7-day schedule. I always had to feed on that day. It always had to be this size meal. It wasn't until later on I realized this is not how I should be doing this.
Right.
But, you know, the feeding back then too, like, you know, I remember watching the Tracy and Rich Eiley video where Rich Eiley talked about in the early days of the salmon boat, just out of curiosity, he got females up to breeding size in 18 months.
Yeah.
I couldn't even fathom that nowadays, because I don't think I could get a female to breeding size in 18 months without running into a regurgin issue with the amount of food I'd have to feed her.
I did it when I first started doing boas because I was a python guy too, and the pythons would do it. I was doing Burmese pythons. So back in the early 90s, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it too with a boa. And I raised a pair of het albino boas, fed the hell out of them. I mean, like fed the female every 4 days. And in 18 months, she was big enough to breed. I bred them. She had a little litter of live babies and a bunch of slugs. And then it took so much out of her that the next year she did nothing, and she eventually died. So I learned my lesson. I was like, well, they'll get big enough if you keep them, you know, well fed. They'll breed and maybe give you a few babies, and you'll think you're successful. But that female's breeding, you know, lifespan is done. It's gone. She's not doing anything for you. So I learned the older females, even though they're smaller, will have better litters. They have more mature muscle mass, and they're fine with it. So can you do it? Yeah. Do you want to? Why? You're just going to kill off the females. It's a one-shot deal, you know?
Yeah, I think muscle mass is the key there.
100%.
Because what you'll find is people can also starve their boas.
Right.
And you'll see that they just don't look like what a boa should look like. And then they try to breed those and they wonder why the female, you know, got bound up or whatever.
Right.
So muscle mass is a major key there. So it depends on how you feed your animal. You got to be, if you want to keep it small, you got to be smart about how you keep it small.
Right. Right. You know, I'll show pictures of me with my hands over a small boa that's gravid, and people will say, I've even had comments, oh, you're neglecting your snakes, they're malnourished, they're not doing well. You know, here's the thing, if they're malnourished, they're not going to give birth, you know. And all of these little snakes, I had a West Snake K boa have 4 babies this year, no slugs, you know. So she's 5 years old and she could barely eat a medium rat. You know, a medium rat is like a Burm eating a pig, you know. So feeding is everything, you know, proper feeding. That's it.
Now, what you also got to realize, however, is that, you know, the people that want to be getting into boas, potentially keeping them in their ball python racks, they're not going to be happy with a West Snake K or a Crawl K because there's not 13 different color morphs.
Yeah, there's not enough production.
No, that's exactly it. You know, so it's going to be you know, it's not going to suddenly replace the need for producing animals that the ball python folks might have.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that's kind of like the evolution of somebody as a breeder in the hobby. Again, the ball python gets you in because it's easy. It builds you confidence. You may find another species that you're a little more fascinated about. You might jump into, but there's still room for failure on that new species, and that can honestly knock you out of the hobby at that point.
Yeah.
Because if you're already struggling with a ball python when it comes to the financial end of things, and now you're going out and getting bows or something else that you think you really enjoy, or maybe you really do enjoy but are mismanaged a little bit on how to take care of them, then a couple die, you have a couple bad breeding seasons. That's another reason why I say with boa guys, usually 5 years the shelf life for a boa guy. Even if they buy babies, they put 5 years into it. They go into the first breeding year, they start counting their babies, and then their female rolls on them. And they're all like, what am I doing with myself anymore?
Well, you got to get to the point where you are constantly, not constantly, but you've got animals in the back burner waiting to be the next breeders. You know, that's like how I do it. There's always a younger female in the waiting in the wings to replace the older ones, because I've been doing this so long that once the females get to be, I would say 12 to 15 years old, they're most likely done at that point. But there's always younger ones that are coming up behind them, you know, that I'm raising up.
And depending on how often you breed them, they can go longer, right? I've got 2 females this year. They're in their early 20s that both produce healthy litters.
Right.
But I think I breed them for it might be every 3 years that I breed them.
Right. And I'm not saying they're done, but it's like
Okay.
they start getting to the point where they're having smaller litters. It's taking longer time for them to gain weight. So obviously I keep trying. Like this year I had a female. She's, let's see, she's probably 15. And she produced a lot of babies in her life. I think I counted 7 litters up till now. And I gave her a break for like 2 years because she was like slowing down, and I was going to give her to somebody as a pet or for a display animal. And this year, last fall, she was really hungry. And I fed her like a rabbit and fed her a bunch of rats in a row and ended up putting a male with her just to see what she would do. She had like 30 babies, you know. She's a big Colombian type snake. And I thought she was done. You know, I thought based on what she did last breeding season for her, which was a couple of years ago, I thought she'd be done, but she's still going. But you know, here's the thing: she's a bigger animal, taking a lot more space, and I'm trying to bonsai boas, so I'm keeping the smaller races and the smaller stuff, simply because I don't want to take up so much space for one big snake. You know.
Okay, so something random that just I thought about when you're talking about that. So I have a female, I think it's hypo jungle blood sharp, virgin female. Now my partner raised her in Buffalo, decided he didn't want to work with boas anymore, sent her to me a little over a year ago. Now that was another one when she came in. She was really aggressive with feeding. It was like early summer. Actually, I think I got her back in March. Fed her over the summer, and then I checked her in the fall, and she was at like 13 millimeters.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a male for her. I wasn't prepared, so I didn't breed her. The next month I checked her, she bumped up to 19 millimeters, just being on a normal feed schedule, which was like every 10 days for me at that point. And then I went to check her again, and she was in the 20s. I took her off food, stopped feeding her. She reabsorbed. My fear was she was going to keep developing without a male and slug out, and I have had females just with food cycling slug out on me.
Yeah, it will happen. It will.
Yeah. I feel like we're talking real basic bitch stuff right now. Warren's like looking around like, fuck, is this like 5th grade right now? But
I got an email that I got to approve.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I got his full attention. You.
No, you got me. I'm here. Don't you worry. I can do multiple things.
No, okay. Well, you know what? I'm going to throw something at you then, because you're a Sigma guy. Sigma was one of the earlier boas you were working with when it came to locales.
It was the first boa that I got into.
All right, that's what I thought. So my first question is, when did we become so bougie that we started calling them Sigmas and not Scorias?
Whenever we published a paper a handful of years ago that showed that they were, and not Sonorans, you mean?
Not Sonorans, you mean. See, this is because I never understood why we call them.
We don't necessarily know animals are collected in Sonora, right? We can tell genetically that they're Sigma. So unless you have actual provenance of where the animal was collected, you know, we can't say that the actual leopard boa was truly a Sonoran boa. True. We can't say that the hypo was truly a Sonoran boa, but we know that they're Sigma, and we know the general range that covers. And then genetically, we showed I was part of a group that split those a handful of years ago, that showed that the eastern, you know, group are Sigma, the western are Imperator.
Because again, and that all makes sense now with what you're saying, but literally I just feel like one day in the hobby I woke up and this guy started saying Sigma to me, another guy started saying Sigma to me, and I was like, okay, what's going on? No one even mentioned the paper. I should know that.
You should know that.
I pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah. It's on my website.
It's in my book.
Cool. I'll go there.
There's a whole chapter about it in my book.
All right, fair enough. I'm just over here drinking with people and having weird conversations at bars, learning things every once in a while.
If I can find it, I'll throw it into the chat.
All right. Here's another question then. So what was your feeding schedule like when you first started working with those guys? Like, were you smart about it, really sporadic about your meals, slow growing, or early on were you getting there fast?
No, so how I got into Sonorans or Sigma, they were sold to me as Sonoran desert boas. My friend Jonathan and I bought 6 of them through a boa breeder importer called Clive Osborne, who was in the UK. He had, I mentioned him before, but he had Nebulosa, he had Orpheus, he had F1 Hog Island. It's just an incredible collection of boas. But he called us up and told us that he could get us some of these Sonoran boas that were dwarf, and that interested me. And he could get them from Germany, or he could get them through Germany from the ham show. And we bought 6 of them. I kept the largest pair, which were 3.5 feet, 4 feet at max. My buddy kept a pair. We sold a pair, and I put them into the pair of them into a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot enclosure that was on the floor of my reptile room, which was a tiny little box room back in Belfast. 8 feet by 6 feet, kind of thing, at max 5 feet maybe. And I fed them because they were down there. I was working mainly with tree boas, so I was working up, waist high with everything, and I kept forgetting about those. So they got fed very, very sparingly. To the point that I didn't realize their heating element. I used a ceramic heating element to heat the enclosure. I didn't realize it went out one time. And then that would have been in the winter. In the spring, I moved them into a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot that I built in my bedroom. And I turned around one day. I didn't really pay attention to the female. I turned around one night and she was giving birth. But I, as far as feeding, they got fed maybe 6 times a year, 8 times a year, ultra sparingly. But I've done that for years with all of my stuff. Mm-hmm. I've always been very sparing with the way I feed snakes, just because of what I think happens in the wild. They're not sitting on a branch; they're sitting on the ground. And every Friday at 3 o'clock, a rodent of the exact size walks by.
Right.
So I always fed very, very sparingly.
That's fair.
And I did have my adult Sigma, my adult Imperators. They get a large rat once every 4 to 6 weeks, and they're only fed from March through to November. And if they breed, they're only fed from whenever they give birth. I'll feed them small meals while they're gravid, very small meals. But from the time they give birth, which might be in April, May, June, through to November, that's whenever they get to eat again. And some of them go on to breed the next year. They eat enough and they go on to breed the year. Some of them wait a year or 2 years.
Okay, interesting. Like I said, and I'm sure Vince said the same thing. Early on, I don't know if it's being impatient or just not fully understanding, but I'm sure if I had that species too, like any other boa species at that point, I probably would have just fed them every single week.
Well, you remember what was the term that people used to use? You got to feed them to breed them.
Yeah, feed them to breed them.
And that's why you saw these massive, 8-9 foot Colombian boas that were thicker than your thigh and eating pigs. That's not a natural kind of body structure for any of those. Yeah, and remember, like Nicaraguans and Mexican boas, they can get big. They can get long, but they're not getting that fat kind of into these J. Brewer diameter, reticulated pythons. These massively obese animals.
Okay, so one thing on that note. Usually a big Colombian is not a good looking animal. Normally the sides are blown out. Their shape looks wrong. The only animals I've ever seen in a collection that when they're big, they still look like a firm, muscular animal is Frank Martin. I think Frank Martin talks about a giant gene is the way he might have put it back in the day about them. And I really mean it. I had a couple animals over here. Again, they were acquired when they were a little older. But I mean, they were the biggest boas in the collection, but they were flat back, flat side. They just look like a big, healthy snake.
Were they hybrids or were they pure Imperator?
His are pure Colombians.
I thought so.
They may have been Colombians that were on the cusp of constrictor.
Right. They're big, but the interesting thing about these is that within a litter, you can separate the animals out into those that are big and those that are small.
Oh.
So we're working on the boa constrictor genome at the moment, and hopefully we'll have the chromosome level genome finished soon. But that's an animal that I actually want to look at because that might actually be able to identify a gigantism gene.
Wow.
Because whenever you can get that clear split in litters, it suggests that it's actually a genetic trait and not a polygenic trait. Otherwise you'll see a gradient, you'd see a cline of different sizes.
Right.
It would suggest kind of integrate or hybrid. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, when it comes to boas, or at least when it comes to Colombians, we're talking morphs. I mean, it's all hybrids at this point. Like the original hypo introduced to every Colombian mutation you've ever seen out there was not a pure Colombian. Yes. You know, it's actually fascinating. I've been bringing up, like, I've been saying that for years, how, we've never really had pure Colombians, of course, when it comes to hypo. Chef Ronnie had his in the early mid-2000s from an import. I know people now going out and finding those animals and trying to find those pure hypos from back in the day, which I actually think is really cool. I just hope there's still pure hypos.
Yeah, I need to talk to Jeff about that. I was chatting to him last night, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't have any lurking in the back of his building somewhere. It would be odd. I know that he did say there was not a lot of interest in them, and that might be why he never proceeded further with them. But you would still think that he would maintain, if it was a pure hypo, he would maintain it here and there.
You would think, but I also think the mindset of the hobby back then and maybe over when he had it, it just wasn't the right mindset at that point. There wasn't like those people that wanted something really pure like that like thought it'd be a really cool thing to have around. I think it was almost just a little too early for its time. Like if a pure Colombian came in tomorrow and you had somebody else that had pure stock and you were going to do it, I could see people very fascinated in going that route. Like, it's niche, but there are people who love that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So,
but then, whatever it was 15 years ago, there didn't seem to be. Right?
They did. And, again, when I say this kind of stuff, I say what my view on the outside looking in is. And when I saw them, I thought, wow, that's really cool, because they were on his website, and I was on his website all the time. But I just bought my salmon hypos. They were dripping with color. I loved everything about them. I didn't really think about the benefit of owning a pure hypo Colombian at that point, especially seeing I was paying more money for it than your other hypos. And in my eyes at that point, it wasn't a nicer animal than what I was buying. But again, what I was buying was hybrids.
Yeah, but remember also that at that point, not a lot of people really knew the origin of the hypo, right? Before the internet was so accessible, before Vin's books came out, people thought a hypo Colombian was a hypo Colombian. They didn't realize it was Panamanian, or potentially Nicaraguan hypo, right? They just thought it was a hypo boa. They also didn't care, right? They didn't care that the blood came from El Salvador, at least the initial ones. It was just a boa constrictor, right? It wasn't anything more than that. There were very few people that really were locality minded and so on, So it just didn't come up at that point.
Okay.
Still a lot of people aren't locality minded.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, people get into this for different reasons, and I've got no issue with that. People get into it because they want to make really interesting animals and they cross everything they can together, and that's fine as long as they're honest about what they're crossing, right? And other ones are interested in keeping locality lines pure. I do both, right? But and therefore people want to get a Costa Rican T positive from me. They can buy a pure Costa Rican T positive or a pure Costa Rican black boa, or they can buy integrades, or hybrids even when I bred in the leopard. But they know up front, I'm not going to sell them an integrate as a pure animal. So I've got my projects that I find interesting in both of those kind of realms.
Okay.
And Vin's the same, right? Vin's got projects that are crossing different things into, the Panamanian hypo into Sigma for the leopard and so on, and he's still got his pure animals. So
yeah, I just keep them separate. I mean, just don't mix and match.
That's it.
So this may have been a story that one of you guys told me in the past about some of the original hypos found in Panamania, but I had heard a story, I forgot the gentleman's name, that he picked a hypo boa off a fence at the airport and took it on the plane with him, and that was like one of the original hypos. You guys ever hear that story?
No, the only story I heard was Rich Eiley got one from a pet store.
Yeah.
And bred it to Colombians and made the salmons. And the guy Jeff G got some hypo Panamanian boas, and that's what became the orange tail hypo. So
the story is that there was a Dr. Hardy. He had he brought the original hypo, but that's exactly pretty much the story. He got it he brought it home with him as a pet. He lived up for many years. He actually lived up Portal Road, not far from in Arizona, not far from Bob Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
He kept that in his room, and he bred them and produced interesting animals, but just gave them away. So that's probably the origin. And Jeff Gee lived about
he's right there
down the road from.
That's probably where those came
What
from.
Jeff did was, and I know Jeff as well.
Yeah,
Jeff bred those together continually.
right.
So he didn't introduce Colombian to it. He just bred. So his were pure Panamanian.
Right.
He was breeding back to each other, which is why the orange tail looks very different than the salmon.
Right.
Right. Whereas Rich, as you know, we had Rich on the show a while ago, and I'll see Rich next week out in New Mexico. He got one in a pet store and been bred to a Colombian. So the orange tail and the salmon are both the same trait.
Right.
Different origins in terms of they got to a fork in the road, and it all came from Dave Hardy's original animal that was kept as a pet in his office.
Right.
Yeah. So that was something I actually didn't know early on. I think that's actually information I found out a couple years ago when I was having the discussion, the difference between the hypo and the orange tail stuff. And in that same conversation is when we were talking about like the Spectre and Carbon project. And I kind of looked at it the same way. You know, the salmon is like the Carbon. It's a more Colombian influence, more cleaned up animal, where the Spectre is a little more of that CA look to it. It's a little dirtier, a little darker pigments coming through, which I, really like them both. I do like the refined version, but I kind of like that dirtier animal. It's got a little more of that CA influence in it.
So the black-eyed and the Carbon, right? So the Carbon popped up out of the Aztec line, right? It was originally called translucent.
Yes.
Well, the question, and we know that the black-eyed came from Nicaragua, right? So Ralph Davis got those.
Yep.
The question is, where did the Aztec come from? And there's a lot of people, including myself, that believe the Aztec was a Central American. So it's quite possible that the Carbon, the translucent, is the exact. And I think low-key Boas or whatever, Chaz Chillins, did he breed a black-eyed to a Carbon this year and got black-eyed?
I can ask him. I was actually chatting with him a little bit over text the other day. If he did, I wouldn't be surprised because, when you were just talking about Jeff G in Arizona, oh, wow, Rich Eiley has an animal in his pet store that looks weird.
In Arizona.
When you look at regionally where a lot of those animals were coming from and so forth, the reality is there could be possets popping around for the black-eyed and you wouldn't even realize it until you realized it. And, when something pops up, I always want to think it could be something brand new, but I heard the argument that someone said that if you bred a Spectre to a Carbon together, it'd be an allele kind of thing. They're all going to look the same, but I think they're all going to look the same because they all are the same.
But remember this also, that here's the other side of the coin here. Things like leopard, onyx, and Costa Rican black are all the same, are mutations of the same gene.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're locality-specific mutations of the same gene, we believe. But we haven't sequenced that gene to know that they're the exact same mutation. Right? Because if you've got a gene, it's possible that you've got mutations in different regions of the gene that cause that gene product to malfunction. And if you get two of them crossed together, so an onyx and a leopard, whenever they're both producing a malfunctioning gene, that means that that gene, the product is malfunctioned, and they're going to produce the same phenotype, which is why leopard, onyx, and black boa look identical. The only difference between them is the locality-specific traits caused size differences and some speckling differences and so on. The same thing can happen with anything. So the other side of the coin is that Carbon and black-eyed could be different evolutionary origins, but they could be mutations of the same gene. Just like we have the TSK T positive, the Costa Rican T positive, the Honduran T positive. You breed them all together, you get a T positive, right? So it's possible that until we identify those genes and sequence those genes, we won't be able to tell whether the mutations are identical or not identical.
All right. So when you said you breed all those T positives together, you get a T positive. Are you saying you breed them together, you get visuals in the first litter, or are you talking about making double heads?
Yeah, we've done Honduran T positive to Costa Rican T positive and produced a litter of T positives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't know that. That's interesting. So again, a little bit of mystery on the black-eyed. That was just kind of my, take on it based on looking at those animals, the region they came from, the likelihood of things popping up, so on and so forth. That's what I thought it could have been. A story that I bring up all the. Oh, go ahead.
But again, we got to look at it just like the hypoboa. It's just line breeding at that point. So I'm happy with people calling them carbons because they've been bred into Colombians and that's where they're going, right? Whereas the black-eyed aneuploristic, people tend to associate that with the Nicaraguan and they breed it into the smaller stuff. Yeah, I know they're breeding IMG into it and so on. But they're a very different looking animal visually because there's more Central American in it. Really, it's been maintained more in the Central American. Now, if you start getting a black-eyed aneuploristic and start breeding into your Colombians, within a generation or two, you're probably going to produce things that look like carbons.
Yeah,
those Colombian traits will eventually kind of come to the surface.
Yeah, that's again how I looked at that, and my comparison to archtail and salmon and so on and so forth. Just a little more Colombian in there, just cleaning it up, making it a little more crisp. But again, I do like that dirty looking animal. The BWC, was that always pure Colombian?
Yeah, we believe so.
Started that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
From Sharon Moore.
Thought so.
Yeah, and from what I know, like Sharon kept her animals in interesting ways, like big enclosures with like lots of animals in the same enclosure. That's how I got into the first Parthonogenesis story. She'd kept a female with 4 different males and produced offspring that were all BWC. They're all Boa and Caramel. And we wanted to know what was the male, which male bred her, so that she could breed it the next year. Because it's just been housed together and saw multiple males courting the female. But I don't believe she had true red tails in those. Because remember, at that point also, true red tails were not as easy to keep. They went through the whole regurgitation issue because people were keeping them too warm and feeding them too much and not keeping them hydrated fully. So therefore, not as many people were keeping true red tails.
Yeah, interesting.
Not keeping them well and breeding them, at least.
So,
But sadly, that's a trait that's almost been lost because everybody bred into sharps.
Right, they're almost gone.
And like the other funny thing I think is, people used to call the Cal T negative and the sharp T positive. There's absolutely no evidence that a sharp is T positive. It's more likely T negative.
Yeah, T negative.
And just a different part of the gene pathway is broken. It's because remember, it's not just one albino gene causes the phenotype. It depends on where the chain of events that switches on and switches off.
Yeah, and the same scenario happened in corn snakes with albinos and ultramels. Right. It's like an albino making a T negative making a T positive. And what people don't realize too is that two T positives can make a T negative, meaning for example, I did the caramel ball to the ultramel. Those are 2 T positives in reality. Some people might want to call them hypo. To me, it's the same thing. You make a double het because they're not allelic, and you breed those, and you make what I call the camarilla, which is like an albino with red eyes in reality. So, the 2 positives make a negative, and it happened with boas too. I mean, the Nick Frake in Holland did the Nicaraguan T positive to the Honduran T positive, made double hets, bred them, and he called them angels. They had like a reddish eye, and they're almost pink and white.
But if you look at some of these boas, like the Costa Rican boas, their sides are gray blue in color.
Right.
Whenever you cross some of these things, you're likely getting that expression coming out as well. I see it in the Costa Rican T positives all the time.
Right.
But to go back to T positive, T negative, there's only one snake species that has ever been proven to be T positive or T negative, and that's the original corn snake.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Right. Everything else is all just it's light, so it's T negative. It's darker.
Right. So it's just names that we've coined on what we believe.
That's it.
Yeah. And like
once we finish sequencing the genome, the albino gene will be easy to identify. It'll be interesting to look at variants across these different lines of albino that we've got.
Right, and like I said, the T positives you can call hypos.
Look at the original albino Argentinian boas. They were originally called hypo Argentines, right? But they were T positive. People thought the original super hypo Sonorans were a T positive.
Right. Yeah. They when they're first born, they easily look like a T positive.
Absolutely, yeah.
So last thing on the black-eyed anery, and then I want to ask you just some like random things about just morphs popping up in collections, I guess. But so for a little while now, actually ever since Big Mike made the blizzards, I've had the conversation that I believe that the black-eyed anery is actually more of an axanthic trait in boa constrictors and less of an aneurystic trait in boa constrictors. How could we ever get to the point where we can say that for sure? Like, how is there any way genetically we can go forward with that project to change the name to axanthic over anery?
Well, we've struggled for 15 years to get people to stop calling ball pythons or traits co-dominant and to call it incomplete dominant or dominant.
We're doing it, buddy. I'm still doing it.
I think the likelihood of being able to get someone to call their boa axanthic versus aneurystic it's a losing battle to start off with. If you can't turn around and just call a trait what it actually is because you're too lazy, I think we've lost that battle.
Well,
axanthic and aneurysm are almost synonymous because aneurysm is lacking red, axanthic is lacking yellow, and yellow and red are derivatives of each other. So which one is it? Like also, when I go back to like corn snakes, there's aneurystic corn snakes and they have a trace of yellow in them. So are they axanthic? No, they're aneurystic because they're lacking red. But there's aneurystic type B corn snakes that have no yellow in them. But yet those corn snakes are het for the aneurystic type A with the yellow in them. They all share. There's a common allele that's turning off that red/yellow. So aneurystic boas, type 1, type 2, black eye. Type 1s may have a bit of a yellowish tinge because when they get older, they're a little brown. Type 2s don't really have that. The black eyes don't really have that. So it's like, how do you categorize them? Are they axanthic? I think they're all axanthic,
until we can identify the genes that are associated with the production of axanthophores, which are xanthism, and erythrophores, which are the red, right? So we're not going to be able to tell whether they're one or the other, truly.
Right. It's just too much work. I mean, who's going to do that?
Yeah, who's going to fund that kind of research?
Right.
That's fair. So, talking anery and axanthic, Jeff Senior, JMG Reptiles, coral ghost stuff, salmon snow stuff. So if you've seen with this coral ghost stuff, yes, there's hypo in there also, but you're essentially breeding pink pigment into your black and white and gray animal. And after multiple generations, I think you use strawberry and some other things to do that, but you're getting these beautiful purplish pink anery babies being produced, which I've been doing for a while. He did the 12 years of work in it. The fact that he can bring pink pigment into that, would that mean that the corns are more of an axanthic?
Yeah, because they still have the presence of erythrophores.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. So you guys follow Don Patterson?
Yes, in Canada.
Yeah, did you see his Western blue tongue post the other day?
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Where he got an axanthic or aneurystic and a hypo.
Yeah,
I think it's axanthic.
Yeah.
I thought they were aneries. I don't know, man. But no,
black and yellow.
Black and yellow.
They're beautiful though.
Yeah. Oh, unbelievable. It's really weird how genetics work. And that's such a dumb thing to say, but Vin, have you ever had a mutation pop up in your collection?
Yeah, leucistic ball python.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay.
The
so
Russo ball
popped up in your collection, you brought them together.
2001.
Fair. You had aneurystic sigmas pop up.
Yeah.
That was completely random.
And yeah.
All right. Is there just a lot of animals out there carrying mutations? Because especially with this whole Don Patterson hitting, this wasn't something that he was planning for. These are mutations that I don't even think have been discovered in Australia yet. As far as I know, there's not a lot going on with the Westerns there. For him to, in the same breeding year, randomly have a hypo pop up and randomly have an anery or axanthic pop up, I can't fathom it. It just seems like most unlikely.
Think about what's happening with breeding.
Right.
And how people buy their snakes. They buy siblings and they breed them.
Yeah.
And then they sell their offspring and people buy siblings and then they breed them. So what you're doing is you're losing genetic diversity as you go through these different
you're
generations.
increasing your odds of
Therefore, if a
those
mutation
lining up.
arises in a gene wherever, because you're buying siblings, it's possible because all it takes is that one individual. So, the first animal you got in just happened to be het for whatever. And as you inbreed and inbreed and inbreed, the likelihood is that you're going to find siblings that are both carrying that same recessive trait. And therefore, it'll pop up visually in one of the breedings. They said that there's been, theoretically, it takes about 6 generations to start identifying recessive traits within genomes through line breeding. So,
you've also got the syndrome of, obviously from line breeding, you could have spontaneous gene mutation occur a little more often than you realized, so that happens too.
Well, and also the fact that pretty much all of the babies survive versus in the wild, virtually all of the babies die.
Yeah.
So your odds are already stacked for you identifying.
Yeah. And when I was a kid, there was a magazine, like a nature magazine called Ranger Rick, and I remember one of the editions was albino creatures, and I remember looking through it. It showed like an albino turtle, an albino robin bird, an albino mouse, and as a kid, I was like, wow, that's really cool, thinking that's so rare, But then as time goes on and as the internet evolves, we're seeing more and more people pop things up in captivity than we realize. And then more things are popping up coming out of the wild than we realize too, because of the internet. People can take a picture of like those albino anacondas in the wild or an albino Suriname boa in the wild. So I think these traits are far more common than we realized from the beginning,
Yeah.
But like Warren said, when they're born in the wild, they're not surviving. In captivity, they're surviving, and the genes are there. Look at Syrian hamsters. The entire bloodline of Syrian hamster in the United States was like a big-time pet industry pet. Started with literally a handful of hamsters, like 4 or 5. And now look at those Syrian hamsters. There's every color morph under the sun, not by adding wild blood, just from those 4 or 5 original wild animals from 60 years ago,
The same thing happened if you look at the early studies in Russia on foxes.
Right.
Within 4 to 6 generations, they had black foxes that were then born white.
Yep.
You had leucism, you had floppy ears, you had behavioral changes.
Yeah.
Tail differences. So it doesn't take long with line breeding and
right.
pop these traits up.
You can leap hundreds of, maybe even thousands of years through line breeding in evolution by line breeding.
Yeah.
I feel bad for not remembering this gentleman's name. He passed away a few years ago. He had I don't know if it was New Mexico or Arizona, but he was a bearded dragon breeder. He had a greenhouse set up. He did other species. I feel bad for not remembering his name right now. He was in one of the
Bob. Was it Sandfire Dragon Ranch? Is that
Sandfire. That's what I'm thinking about.
Bob Mayo.
Okay. I don't know if it was Dave Kaufman's first or second Herpers video he came out with, but I don't know if you guys ever watched those, but he was at his place, and I want to say that they found an albino North American toad maybe, and he bred it to a normal, and in that offspring, there was a pied and a melanistic that formed right off the bat. Wow. I thought that was another really bizarre one. Like that, not so much in the lottery, but like genetically that ending up that way, like what's that all about? Like it's not like
but again, things like toads, they mass breed in small areas. Right. They don't disperse very far.
They're genetically isolated.
Yeah. So they're in these little isolated pockets. So it's more common for those things to pop up. Whenever you're basically inbreeding. Right. So as inbreeding continues, you're more likely to see these recessive traits pop up as being visual.
So I don't know if I read this or someone told me this before, but I think what they said is 6 generations of inbreeding in a small population in the wild ups your chances significantly of fitting a mutation, like you guys are saying. You know, if there was one het popping around in there, you know, the one story I always like to talk about because he actually kept really good records was when Pete Call accidentally made an exanthic pied. I want to say it was 2008. And the backstory on it, which made it really interesting, was he traced it back to a female that was an import in like 1993, I want to say. And I want to say it was like female 19. And he bred that to one of the original pieds, held back het females from that. And then literally in 2008, I want to say it was, he bred a pied male to that female just to pump out pieds, and he hit an exanthic pied. And he was able to trace back that male like 4 or 5 generations to connect it to that female. So that female he got in at that point was probably 100% het for an exanthic trait that he didn't know. And then you had the Marcus Jane. He had exanthic pieds pop up randomly. I think Jeremy.
They popped out of his pied line, out of the pieds, right?
Yep.
Very likely they're probably the same trait.
I think they've been proven now because the GCR, Gate City Reptile, same thing. They bred some pieds, had exanthics popping up. And I had that conversation with these guys for a long time that I thought that that's what was going on there. It was just that exanthic was put into the project so early that it's been floating around, and a couple of the right guys popped up.
Yeah,
all pythons are basically the corn snake now, right? You know, you buy an animal, and likely due to genetic testing, you can find out what else is in it, but it's very unlikely that you buy a ball python that is not het for multiple other things that are being masked.
Yeah, it's like you said with corn snakes. Try and find a normal corn snake. It doesn't exist. You breed. No. I guarantee you breed your normal corn snakes to each other. You're going to make snows, albinos, anarthristics, stripes.
Well, Okati have an albino pop up from some of that pure stuff that they were working with. I thought that was pretty unique, but again, that was a small group of animals. I don't know if there's any pushback on that, but
so is that being bred in captivity now? Is it being bred pure Okati albinos?
I think so. I mean, I've seen a couple pictures, but I guess I haven't seen a ton of them. Then you're a little bit of a corn snake guy.
Question would be, is it allelic with the other albino corn snake? You know,
more than likely.
The Dr. Bernard Bechtel albino corn snake, which is where they all originated from.
Yeah.
Well, if they got a male that could be a sacrificial lamb, it could always breed another A male and just see what happens.
Right.
Just because, but I don't know. Like, honestly, I've only seen him a little in passing. I think I might have had a small conversation with Craig Trumbauer about it, but outside of that, it was just something I heard that popped up in that group.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. So I talked about it a little bit, but so like I said, a little bit of a hodgepodge here sometimes, just because, you know, my partner was just buying shit. And some of these animals didn't have labels on it. He had a female hypo. It was literally labeled zigzag motley hypo. And the thing was not a motley. No chance. But I bring that animal up. I bred a labyrinth to her. She ended up being super hypo. I held back 3 labyrinth males. And then this year, I had a high-tech female. I thought she might be het VPI because, again, it didn't have a label and he wasn't just buying normal animals. But I bred that one of those labyrinth males to that female, and I made anarthristics. Now, such a long shot, so stupid. Like, I'm assuming that female, that one that he had marked zigzag, might have been some stuff he got from Frank Martin about a decade plus ago. And maybe that had something to do with some of the anery stuff he was working with over there. But at first, I'm going to sound really dumb. I get home really quick. It's like middle of the day. I only have like 5 minutes in the shop. I'm checking for litters. There's a litter of labbies. I pull them all out. I look at one. I'm like, wow, that looks weird and paradox. It was really soft and kind of smoky looking. I was like, cool. Put them in a bin, took a picture, ran the fuck out. Before even looking at them, sent it to a couple of people. It took someone else to look at that picture to tell me I had aneries in there. I was working so fast, and I just thought it was one paradox. But the one that looked weird to me, I believe, is like super hypo. I know it sounds crazy to say this, but super hypo, Pos Jungle, Aztec, Labyrinth, and Erythristic. So it goes with a bunch of shit in it. It's super faded, almost nothing going on. Now, the other one that looks really good is just Jungle, Anery, No Hypo, Aztec, and Labyrinth. Now, that's a really cool looking animal. Really nice contrast, beautiful eyes, but that was kind of crazy. Like I said, and this is working with people's animals. When you don't understand what you have around you, dumb things happen. And I've always just treated that group of animals as like, I'm going to make nice pets, or at least, stuff I know what I'm working with. Warren, your buddy, was at my table and picked one of those guys up for me at the show. We talked a little bit about that in person, but it was a cool accident. I don't want to sound like an asshole. I didn't want any cool accidents in that litter. I just wanted a few cool looking animals. I didn't want to scratch my head afterwards.
Yeah, things like, with breeding snakes, a lot of people want to get to the possible head aspect. Once they've tried it once, then the pos head is lost, right? Because either they don't care, or they didn't prove it out in their one breeding, so therefore it's not a pos head.
Right.
Like I think I've said this before. I bred a Cal albino to a het one year and produced 48, something like 48 babies, and I got one albino. 49 hets was the worst year ever. But 2 years later, I got 20 something albinos because you don't hit it. And I bred het leopard boas together years ago that produced leopards in every litter I produced. And 1 year I got 26 babies and not a single leopard.
Yeah.
Right. And therefore people would, if I had to label those as possets, people would have turned around and said, oh, these are not het, but I knew they were, and it's, leopard's an incomplete dominant trait anyway, so you can tell what a het leopard looks like. But, I think people, whenever they don't prove it out immediately, or it gets to the posset state, that's lost. And therefore your animal was, probably a posset anerythristic that they hadn't labeled.
Yeah.
And again, just like as we mentioned with corn snakes, start going back into the animals that they were bred from, and you'll find out, those hets or possets were in there.
Well,
all it takes is one anerythristic in the family tree. It could be 5 generations back.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and the other thing is that anerythristic in the wild is definitely not a detrimental trait. It doesn't do anything to them.
Right. It exists in the wild.
Likely, if we were to look at the frequency of animals that are anerythristic or het anerythristic in the wild versus albino, you're going to see a higher frequency of those that are anerythristic or het anerythristic, and therefore those genes are likely more dispersed throughout wild populations as well, which is why you find like the original bloods that came in were also het anerythristic. Right? You've seen it in other animals that come in. Yeah, the El Salvador ones were also het anerythristic, which is why we see anerythristic.
Well, one of the first times Ron bred those, he bred a blood to an anerythristic because he had found anerythristics in the same shipment.
Yeah.
So think about it. All blood boas have a potential to be het for anerythristic.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Warren, you'll remember this name, but Chris Canada Smith.
Yeah, I know Chris well.
Yeah, I remember back in, I was probably around like 2005 to 2008. I met him at the Charlotte show, and we were always chit-chatting, but one of the blood pairings that he did back then had plasmas pop up in the first ones, pewters, completely unexpected. But
and here's an odder thing. I popped up blood boas from Nicaraguan boas in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
The original Nicaraguan boas came from Ben Siegel in 2002. And I bred them, made hyponics and nicks. And, for years I was making them and selling them. And then one year in 2015, I pop out a litter and I pull the tub out and I see blood boas. And my mind doesn't grab right away because I'm used to pulling tubs out and seeing blood boas. And then I realized that female is not even a blood boa. She's a Nicaraguan boa. Then I looked to see she bred to her son, who was a hyponic. And she had a quarter of her babies, almost exactly. It was 5 out of 20 were bloods. So I raised those up and bred them back into the Ron St. Pierre bloods, and it was allelic. I made bloods. But here's the weirder thing. The bloods that I bred to each other that were from that original litter made type 1 anerythristics. So that blood trait from Nicaragua is het for type 1. My blood trait from El Salvador, the Ron St. Pierre stuff, is het for type 2.
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, with Nicaragua, the anerythristic, that's what they always keep popping up in Nicaragua.
Yeah, it's very common there.
And it's the same thing. You look at with the blood, the same thing happened with John Berry. He bred in El Salvador St. Pierre line animal to a imported reddish animal that came from Ben Siegel and produced the first berry bloods, the El Salvador, Nicaragua.
Yeah, the trait's there.
Yeah. Again, like something like blood is not a detrimental trait.
Right.
Animal redder.
Right. When they're older, they're a little redder. They're darker. So, especially the original wild ones, it's like they could easily blend in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember the John Berry one. Actually just picked up a couple of his old books the other day. I got to start going through them. I didn't have the money to buy them back then, so I paid double for them now, like a decade later.
John's writing a new one.
Oh, what was that?
John is writing a new book. I spoke to John recently.
Interesting.
He's writing a new book. Yeah.
So, little side note, you'd have an answer for this, Warren, but you think, has John ever done a podcast or talked to animals?
No, he's probably good about it. He's a super nice guy.
If that's something, because honestly, the moment I bought the book, because I do these podcasts so much, that was like the very first thing that popped in my head is, well, that would be really unique to have him on and have a conversation. If you ever want to do that,
backstory, like from South Africa, he's one of these guys that spent like 2.5 weeks in a cage with 48 vipers and all that.
A bunch of venomous snakes. Yeah.
But he's a super nice guy. He breeds a lot of hognose. He did a bunch of boas in his day. He's got a decent backstory.
All right. Well, maybe in the future, Warren, if you want to join me for a thing like that, he'd be somebody I'd love to just hear some stories from. Yeah, maybe not. Just in my future. If MJ's listening, he likes when I have things done in advance, not just like on a Thursday. So, if we set something up in like 2 months, he'd appreciate it.
I'll send John a message.
Appreciate that, bud. So here's a general question that I didn't have the answer for when my buddy asked me, but when people label it as CA, what is that true range of a CA right now in the hobby?
Nicaragua all the way up to North America, essentially, and all of the islands in between.
Okay.
I would say anything that's anything south of Mexico, because Mexico would be Mexican boas. I mean, but you do have Imperator in Mexico on the east side there and a little bit on the west.
Yeah. So
anything south of Mexico to Colombia,
All
to the
CA.
Colombian border, I would say. Panama.
Right.
Anything, especially on the Isthmus of Panama, all that kind of bridge between North and South America.
Right.
Any of the islands, kind of in between that there.
All right. So when it comes to the Honduran and Costa Rican T positive, you guys, like you said, it's the same. It seems to work the same, just different. Would it be inappropriate to breed like a Vin Nicaraguan blood to a Costa Rican to make double hats? Is that something that's already been done a while ago, right?
And the double visual was made this year.
Okay, cool. Is
not from Vins, but from El Salvador, but yeah.
All right. That's okay. No one's gonna bitch about it. It's like we can do it.
Again, if you label it right. That's why I've got hypomelanistic or orange tail hypo leopard Costa Rican T positive. That's Panamanian imperator. It's what else?
Mexican Sigma.
Sigma leopard, right? And I've got the T positive from the Costa Rican imperator. So as long as you label it right, it's fine.
Yeah,
that's fair. I just had a curiosity because I didn't see blood.
Whenever you get the T positive hog islands, because they are very, very subtle. They're super subtle, so you don't want to go there with those.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's where your desert line stuff came from. That's where the Gilbert line is likely the hog island.
I was wondering about that because there was that whole like time in the hobby where we talked about desert. And then we stopped talking about desert like 5 minutes later, and there are a couple of guys in the hobby still messing with it a little bit. But
I had a bunch of them. I had one for a period. It was a nice boa.
Cool. You just got rid of it because it didn't really work into your breeding program once you understood what it was, or
exactly it. Yeah, it just didn't fit into what I was doing. and I don't have time. I don't have space to keep animals that don't really fit into what I do. You know, I got a very small kind of reptile rooms, so I'm pretty specific.
You know, I know we talk Partho a lot, and you know we always got to dabble a little bit in our Partho conversation. You know, I've mentioned to you that I've had boa litters that I think one that stood out to me was about 4 or 5 years ago, where I bred a super raptor male to a red tiger female. I think it was produced by Manny, and you know, not hypo, just red tiger is the way he labeled it. And again, it could have been mislabeled because it was a second yes. The reason I bring that animal up is when I bred that animal to the super raptor, it made 19 raptors and 1 VPIT positive baby. So at that point, the following year, I bred her to a visual VPIT positive to end up with a half a litter of VPIT positives, half a litter of normals. Now, I never would have done that if she didn't accidentally partho a single baby in that litter to let me know that that gene was even in her in the first place.
Yeah.
How I know we pay more attention to a partho when it's like it's partho, it's this whole litter, but do you hear many cases of there just being a single or like 2 partho babies in a litter? Because I get that at least twice.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So think about it, right? The reason people like know that their animals produce parthenogenetically is because they see the visual animal that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But also remember how parthenogenesis works. It's an egg is fusing. So during the second phase of meiosis, whenever you get a cell separating in 2 and then separating again into 2, for one of those groups, the egg likely doesn't separate. So you get 2 sets of chromosomes that fuse together that are almost identical. They could either be the wild type or else they could be the mutation. When it's the wild type, people just look at it as a normal boa. They don't recognize it as a parthenogen. It's only if they see the visual trait expressed when they should see it that they know that's a parthenogen. In those litters that have got a mixture of those with the trait and those without it, and males and females, any female in that litter could theoretically be a parthenogen if it's not expressing another trait in a heterozygous form that's visual.
Interesting. Yeah, you know, when the partho conversations really started back in the day, I always say I was very fortunate to be in North Carolina because the fact that I was even close to you when that was like a relevant conversation made it that much more interesting. You know, I always talk about, I remember you had me at your house that one time. We were looking at the BWC babies that were sent to you at that point, which, by the way, gorgeous animals. Like, still to this day. Yeah.
It didn't do well long term. I got 1 litter from one of them, but that was it.
Now, was that a natural litter or was that a partho litter on top?
The natural. But it was really weird. I bred it to a harlequin from that I got from Brendan McGee. It was from the line that produced the sterling type animals that they had at the time.
Yeah.
You know, instead of doing everything that our boas normally do, you know, they bask and they get their body temperature up to like 86.5 or thereabouts and bask for a long period of time and will regulate between cool and hot. This one just stayed in the cool end all the time and basked at about 82 degrees or didn't bask at a body temperature of about 82. And whenever I see a body temp of 82 on a gravid female, I always assume that they're going to produce slugs. I never really see any producing healthy offspring. But I came in one evening and I saw it giving birth, and there were no slugs, but there were 5 stillborn and 4 live. And there were males and females. That's the reason we knew that was the first hint that the boas were XY sex chromosomes, because they should have produced it. Producing it when we thought the boas were ZZ/ZW sex chromosomes, where males were ZZ and females were ZW, but a parthenogen could only be theoretically WW because of the form. We assumed that all it would make would be ZW females. So whenever I started popping these and finding hemipenes, we knew that something different was happening, and we knew that it was XY, and then we did the genomic work on it. But those 4 that survived were great. They did perfectly well. I actually sent them to a friend with the idea that he was going to raise them up and then breed them back, with the idea of identifying, because in fruit flies, for example, we know that there's 3 genes that are associated with parthenogenesis. Part of it's linked to the separation of the egg from the second polar body. Part of it's linked to separation of the polar body from the egg itself. But in any combination, they can produce parthenogens. So the idea was that we would use those to identify genes that are associated with parthenogenesis. Unfortunately, he sold his collection and didn't tell me he was selling his collection, all of it, and those animals went to somebody else. That person ended up screwing him over, and he never got paid most of the money for the animals, and that person disappeared. So those 4 animals have now evaporated into the Boa ether. So I'll never be able to pick this up again to do any real genetic work with. But we had ball pythons that were parthenogens that produced, and they produced parthenogens, and then a year later produced sexual, and then a year later on died. So parthenogens just they don't do well. They're a dead end ultimately.
I figured it's kind of a simple way of looking at it, but I never understood why Mother Nature would do a thing like that if it was just creating infertile animals.
Well, it's not producing infertile, but what you got to realize is that it's not affecting the female that's producing the parthenogens. It's because she produced offspring. Some of them are parthenogens, some of them are not. It's not detrimental to her. It might be detrimental to the parthenogen produced, but because it's not detrimental to her, it means that trait is not going to be selected out of the population, which is why we see parthenogenesis in crocodiles. We see it in all of the snakes. We see it in birds. We see it in a whole group of lizards. We see it in sharks. You've seen a bunch of different teleost fish. We see it in amphibians. It's because it's a trait that's not going to kill a population. Now, what you do find, however, is interesting. So work that's been done on small-toothed sawfish. And when populations are really small, there's a likelihood of finding a high propensity for parthenogenesis, which suggests a gene associated with parthenogenesis. And that can be detrimental in small populations, because then you're producing lots of offspring in litters that are actually parthenogens and won't necessarily make it to reproduce. But in general populations, it's not going to be selected against. It's not a detrimental trait. It sucks. It's really interesting, but it sucks whenever you produce them.
So do you think Jesus was a Partho baby?
Well, it can't have been. One, if you believe all that shit. But 2, it's mammals are XXXY, so therefore that was not going to work for him. He would have been a YY, and that's not working.
Yeah. Now we know.
The Y chromosome is so small and non-functional, basically that he was not a parthenogen. There we go. I've said it. I'm going to get all the hate mail now. But yeah. But I've got 2 parthenogen ball pythons and an androgen ball python downstairs at the moment that were sent to me by Justin Kabilka. And the androgen is like a parthenogen, but it only contains the genetic material of the male, and it contains the mitochondrial DNA of the female. So that's kind of an interesting kind of animal, and it's doing fucking awful. I came into it; it's been feeding great, and then I walked into it 2 nights ago, and its head's inflated the size of a freaking golf ball. So they just don't do well. They're just awful animals. I don't know. I've published a lot of papers on it, but they really suck. When people call me up and say, "I've got this, do you want it?" And I'm like, "No."
To watch it slowly become.
Like I said, I can think of all these cases, but even a recent one you brought up, ball pythons. But a buddy of mine, I sent him what is looking to be a new mutation. I sent him the original female because his ball python collection is better than mine, and he's working with that project. And of course, he bred a all-star of a male to that female who had already produced a clutch for me in captivity, and she partho for him. And I thought it was bizarre, a little bit of bad luck. Can't tell you exactly why it happened, but
because the reason we're seeing it in high frequency in ball pythons is because they're inbred as shit, right? And if there's genes associated with it, which there definitely are, the likelihood of producing them increases as we do that. The best thing that you could do with that ball python is breed it to one of those $5 wild type males that can come in, right, isolate the trait, and then go from there, instead of saying, I'm going to breed to my 37 gene male, and then you don't have a clue. Because what is it? What is the trait? Is it has it got one extra sprinkle on a scale or something like that there, so it makes it a new trait or something? Or what how
are you making fun of ball python sprinkles?
Absolutely, yes.
Ball python sprinkles now.
But what makes this trait different? What makes it unique?
You remember the old school jungles you'd see in the ball python books you buy at the pet store? Essentially, it was kind of like a wild type kind of jungle pattern that passed on in multiple pairings, and there's a few animals involved in the project. It does look to be genetic, just because what breeding's been done. But this was a rennick animal that popped up. This was just something in his collection. He had labeled 3 animals with the same trait on it. Bred them, got what we got. The ball pythons in Ben's collection are a mystery because he started out with like 90 import females, and then he went out and dropped a bunch of money on fires and other things. But from that 90 females, he bred all these other genes into it and almost held back an entire collection. And because of that now, and Vin knows about this, but so he had, and I'm all over the place now, by the way, but he had a trait he was calling, I walked in the building, there was 4 females labeled Het Jaguar. One was like a pastel lesser, one was a pastel lesser spot nose, one was a lesser spot nose, the other one was a normal. So I bred what he had marked Het Jaguar male to those females the first year. Nothing happened. So I was like, okay, there's nothing there. The following year, I bred a clown to him, and I got Krypton combos. So I believe he had a cryptic pop up in his collection, which also he had Desert Ghost pop up and a bunch of other things. He had a cryptic pop up, called it Jaguar, probably bred it one time, held back the clutch. But in my first breeding of that male to the females, not making anything visual, which could have been bad odds, I almost wrote it off. But again, threw a clown on it just for fun. And again, Kryptons. And that was another thing with his collection is he had his Joppa gene. And he had a Joppa he produced back in 2014 that he had labeled Cinnamon Joppa. And when you look at that animal, it is a visual cryptic. And now when you breed some of the Joppa animals into the Clown Project, we're making Kryptons. So yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I knew. And man, I miss having these conversations with Ben because I always said when I didn't know what a ball python was, I called Ben. His collection is still making me scratch my head to this day. I had one animal that popped up. No, it didn't even pop up. He had a normal female that looked like a blackback, almost like an adder. And I bred it to like a Trojan, a pastel Trojan, and half the babies came out looking like mom. So, of course, I had to breed one of the babies back to mom to see what was going on there. And it essentially made a super form. But the 2 babies, they developed slower in the egg than the rest of the animals in the clutch. I cut a little early out of being greedy and noticed, wow, there's something weird in there. But where everybody else in the clutch, let's say, came out on day 59, those other ones stayed in there to almost day 70. I actually had to get them out, tie them off, like they weren't reabsorbing properly. And I have been assist feeding them. Kind of a weird thing I'm doing right now is an experiment, and I'll let you guys know how it goes. But I think it's called carnivore diet. It's like a powder you mix up. So Cheryl Matula had some blue tongue skinks that were born really weak this year, and she did hydration and did the carnivore diet, and the whole litter bounced back.
Yeah, here's the other thing you can do. You can use just egg yolk.
Say it again?
You can use egg yolk. It'll do the same. Just an egg. Just mix it up and chew it. You'll get the syringe. You can buy them off Amazon for feeding birds, and it'll come with a whole different set of different nozzles. I've used it on everything from Venezuelan tree boas that are the diameter of a pencil or less, through to womas, and 2 or 3 bouts of just using egg yolk, and then they normally bounce right back. The problem is that people try to feed them a big meal. To digest food, it takes energy, and therefore you're likely to kill the animal. So therefore, using egg yolk for 3 or 4 meals, it gives them energy that then they can use to digest bigger meals. But carnivore care does the exact same thing. It's just being able to mix it up in the right concentration.
I've done the yolk with blue tongues, and this whole thing came from the idea of, or the whole thing came from that. But I have done yolks with blue tongues that have come out a little weaker. Ones that don't eat their sack when they're born is always a bad sign. I don't get a bounce back. When she did this carnivore thing and got a bounce back, I was actually really surprised they bounced back because I've had so many die when they're born weak like that. But I will say I did the force feeding with the first couple meals of these oddballs. And then the next couple, I don't like putting it way down there. I put it in there. I let them be. They finished up themselves. Last couple times I've tried that, they've just spit it out. So I did do carnivore diet a few days ago, and I'm going to do it every 2 to 3 days to see if I can maybe get a little more beef on them, because honestly, they didn't reabsorb their yolk when they were in the egg properly. Like I said, I had to tie it off and cut it off to get them out. The one animal didn't even like completely seal up where the umbilical cord was. Like it's sealed up, but it still looks like there's a little bit.
It'll close over. It'll close over within a couple of sheds.
Yes. So these haven't even had their first shed yet, and the rest of the clutch is shed out and had multiple meals already.
Yeah, but remember what so the shed is driven by the yolk being absorbed, right? So they're born with a big yolk, and it's that stretching triggers a shed cycle. So whenever they absorb that, that's why they go into that shed. So therefore, these things are born without yolk. They don't have that initial bulge in their stomach that triggers that direction into the first shed, which is why they'll not shed until you start feeding them.
It's also the digestion of the meal that triggers a shed cycle too, which they didn't get that first meal, meaning their yolk. So
that's it.
But not to knock what you're doing, Dave, but you're just proliferating a very weak gene.
Absolutely. Well, you know what evolution would do to that? It would kill it instantly.
Right.
And here's the other thing. Do you know what you should do? Get your scissors and shove them fucking somewhere else. Stop cutting eggs. Let them hatch naturally, and then you'll have strong snakes hatch. And they'll hatch over a couple of days, maybe even a week. Yeah. I've had my guns pythons this year hatched over the space of 8 days. And do you know what? They're all perfect.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't cut a lot of eggs, but I do cut a lot of eggs. Can I compromise with that? Like I'm not
amazing. See the day that you walk into your incubator and it's all little heads poking out, and you see the egg tooth, and you think, "Oh, that's wonderful." You know.
So
instead of you going with
walk
a pair
of
Walmart scissors and hacking through them.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So my cousin Paulie in Buffalo is breeding ball pythons this year for the second time. He bred them years ago. I got him a few when I lived there. But he did message me, and we were talking about should I cut or don't cut, and I said the same thing: don't cut. If they can't get out on their own, they're probably not going to make it in life. Yeah. So, and here's the thing: I'm making a little ball pythons. I hear about
doing yoga and meditation. Right. Just get past it. Day 54, they didn't hatch. Just wait it out. Day 56, they didn't hatch. Just relax and wait it out. And guess what? If they don't hatch, they weren't meant to hatch.
No, completely agree with that. But, that's the thing about ball pythons that are nice. They are like crash test dummies, dude. You can fuck around and do anything you want, and it's okay. Like, I don't mean that in like a bad way, but I remember stories of guys back in the day that were literally cutting their eggs at like day 45 to see what their odds were because they had to know. And the pigment
that's usually that they're not interested in the animal. They're interested in the dollar signs that are going to come from the animal.
That is very true. A ball python clutch is a scratch-off lottery ticket, buddy. And sometimes
what you should do with your animals you're tube feeding is bring them to like your nearest pine snake or bull snake, and just see if they want to be friends. Just put them and see if they want to be friends and hang out, And if one gets eaten, it shit happens, So,
the cow king works better.
That's it. That's what I use. I've got some desert kings from Portal Road in Arizona. And they're wonderful little hoovers. But I always put these snakes in to see if they want to be friends, but they never do. One of them just,
Sorry.
You know what? I think I'm going to call this podcast White Trash Breeding Advice from Dave. Because, I'll be honest, this entire conversation today, like, you guys are looking at me like I'm crazy. I think.
Well, here's what I'm planning to do next year with my boas. I'm planning to start cutting them at day 90. And I'll use Velcro to seal them up again.
Yeah.
See if that works.
Well, you could just stitch them back up.
Yeah, just do like they do those fistulated cattle, just so they can put a hand in the stomach.
Right.
There'll be a fistulated boa that I can pull out the babies and check what they are.
Or you can get a X-ray machine and just X-ray them every day and see what's in there.
That would work.
I was thinking an MRI. I don't know if an X-ray is really going to do it. Yeah.
Oh God.
That's fair. Here's the
question: do people cut like their corn snake eggs as well?
No, not really. There's a lot of species that people don't cut. Ball pythons, it's just it's a habit that was formed in the hobby or something that just became a norm. And don't pretend like I'm the only asshole in this hobby cutting ball python eggs. Yeah, a lot of us are. But again,
they want to make sure they got their code on.
To make sure they're codom.
Yeah. Hey, cutting for codoms, buddy. Cutting for codoms. Again,
Sorry.
this is the nice thing
I haven't had
about
enough
ball
tea this morning.
pythons. Yeah, no, there's a lot of room for error in ball pythons that honestly, and I say it, it's a good training wheel species. You can cut your eggs. You can incubate them a lot of silly ways on a lot of different silly substrates. You know how I incubate all my ball python eggs now? Cypress mulch. Handful of cypress mulch. I throw in the 6-quart, throw the eggs in there. It's great. The reason I did that is because before that I was using Reptile. Before that I was
That's
using.
what I use whenever I bred ball pythons. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I did Reptile. I did perlite. I did water over egg crate or under egg crate. I did all this stuff. You know,
lots of room
hard
for
to kill a ball
error
python.
species that you can do silly things and still be successful with it.
Look how they hatch them in Africa, the big giant drawers with sawdust.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know if this is an older documentary. I think this was like 10 or 15 years ago, but I want to say some guys from France were over there and they walked into a guy's place and it was a little hut and it was a tabletop with like that tin foil on top. And he pulled it back and there was like African rock babies coming out of eggs. There was ball pythons coming out of eggs.
Yeah.
All
that industry's gone, right? All that part is dying out in Africa because there's no demand for wild type ball pythons anymore.
Right.
So I don't know if there's still a lack of demand. I don't know the number coming out, but I do know that Outback are still doing their dinkers, their unsorted
you're not going
bags.
to get the same numbers aren't coming in every year as they were 15 years ago.
Yeah, it used to be hundreds of thousands. Now it's maybe a few thousand.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's great.
Good thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
For genetics and populations in captivity, it's a bad thing because, you know, all of these people that have all of their, 67 gene animals and they never outbreed it, it's detrimental for them. You know, you're just inbreeding and inbreeding and inbreeding. And while inbreeding has worked in the wild for things like Hog Island Boas and Coral Cay and stuff, that's tens of thousands of years of inbreeding and selection. That's different than 10 years of captivity of inbreeding. It leads to different outcomes. So I've always said that people should outbreed their animals. Buy those $5 female wild types and breed your animals to it and strengthen genetic diversity. But they never do.
Here's one thing that a lot of ball python people don't realize. For example, inbreeding in wild populations happens, and like Warren said, Hog Island and Coral Cay are the perfect examples. But there's also genetically isolated populations of all types of snakes that look similar because they come from a small area. But once you add a deleterious gene or a recessive trait that is a gene mutation, and you start proliferating that with other deleterious gene mutations, you're creating a soup for bad genetics, And when you're line breeding or inbreeding those traits constantly, you're going to start running into issues, and people are probably starting to see it now, specifically in ball pythons. I mean, you keep proliferating these same genes and then combining with other ones over and over and over again, and then breeding brother, sister, brother, son to daughter, whatever. You're going to have a soup of genetic inferiority over time. So Warren's right. You gotta mix some wild blood into those traits every once in a while just to strengthen them up. It's pretty much that simple,
I won't disagree with that. And, anytime we run into an issue, it's usually mutation related. And then we start talking about outbreeding to strengthen mutation, and that doesn't always work.
No.
Some things are out of our control. I think, the study they did on the spider ball python where they noticed that the ear canal is either a little bigger, a little more narrow. I thought was interesting. And, and this is, I think, it'll be our wrap up topics. I know we all have things to do in a couple minutes. So Scoria boa is what we're going to talk about for a second. And I'm going to bring it into a Hog Island conversation. Hog nose, not Hog Island. I'm sorry. So I remember Jeff Ronnie talking about the first time he got to see Scorias, and he went over there with the intention of, I think, sexing the animals, picking something out, and taking one home. And he just went and found these extremely neurological animals and passed on it. That project almost disappeared for a while. I had heard rumors that people who had bought the animals thought the wobble could be IBD connected and just put their animals down. Everything around that. And we've seen the roller coaster of Scoria. Now, if Scoria wasn't such a unique looking boa mutation, people may not have put the work in, but because of how unique it was, some people have put the work in, not necessarily to make the gene stronger, but to produce more of them. I've heard rumors that, like, I have 2 Scorias. One of my Scorias is a het blood. She's sound. She doesn't wobble. She seems really good. I always wonder if that had anything to do with the CA blood bred into her, maybe strengthened it, maybe not. I've heard those rumors over the years. Rumors. Rumor mill, buddy. This is me. This is rumor mill. I guess my thing is, some people will look past a genetic default if it makes a really pretty animal, especially in a community that doesn't have a lot of mutations in the first place, will look past certain things. But most people, I just don't think, look at it as being overly investable. Like spiders, if you have a spider gene in any of your parents and ball pythons at this point, like when we made spider sunsets 8 years ago when sunsets were $5,000 to $8,000, a spider sunset was a $2,000 to $3,000 animal, because anybody who bought it thought that half their babies were not going to be investable, and they didn't want to put a lot into that male because of that. I don't even know what I'm even talking about at this point, because I feel like I was going to bring that all.
You were going to go with Scoria, and then you were going to go with Skullface.
Okay, so Skullface is like the newer conversation.
It's the same thing. It's got a neurological issue.
It seems to have a neurological issue that is not super consistent, similar to the Scoria. Some have it, some don't.
Yeah, but it's the same as spider ball, right? Some express it more than others. It's the same as jaguar and carpet. Some express it more than others. It's all likely to be the same trait or part of the same gene kind of complex. And you're going to get, it's on a climb. It's not you've got it or you don't in terms of you're going to get wobble or you're not. It's likely to be on a climb depending on development of inner ear structure and so on. You know, people think that snakes don't have ears. Snakes very much have ears. They're just not visual external ears. But the inner ear structure it will be deformed to an extent, but it's not going to be it's deformed or it's not deformed, right? And therefore, depending on that level of deformity will lead to that level of neurological more than likely. So I'm sure, I haven't read the study on spider balls, but I'm sure if they imaged 100 different spider balls, they wouldn't just say this is it and this is not it. They would probably see a range of the structural deformity.
And that deformity is attached to the trait itself, so it's never
you're not isolated.
Yeah, it's never
part of the gene pathway to lead to the product.
Right.
So it's not that you can breed that one out of it because you don't have the product in the end. If you do, it's like super mottlys. You're not going to breed the fatal form of the super motley, out by outbreeding. Same with jungle, the super jungle. Same with Aztec. You're going to get some that live a little bit longer, but they're going to look like shit. I was given 6 super black-eyed amethyristic super mottlys by Bill Gaines probably 10 years ago, and several of them died young. Several of them grew up. The ones that grew up looked awful.
They get like narrow.
The head was narrow and it was terrible. You can't breed that stuff out of it. It's just associated with it. But some will last longer than others. Some will express the trait more than others. But and the thing is, breeding that to a different animal, you'll get that full range of effect again. You're not going to breed out over time this neurological issue. Okay. So you say people can bypass it if it looks good, or if it's going to make them. And that's the way I've got a Scoria. I've got a female Scoria Fire hypo. Scoria Fire passed out something, and it's beautiful. And it only expresses that kind of craziness if I feed it. When it's in that real feeding frenzy, it'll roll around the place. But every other time, it's fine. But but if I produce offspring from it, and they're neurologically wiped out, they'll be going to spend time with king snakes just to see if they can make friends. I don't think they will, but yeah. So
that's fair. So I remember a post, Warren, I'm sure you remember this. It was on Facebook years ago. Somebody had bred their super motley female. I think they got like a slug out of this disgusting litter, and they posted it. Yeah, and you commented, and I think you said something along the ways of, like, I don't consider this a win or proving anything. Like, you took an animal.
Reptile Insider.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of crazy.
To me, if you're going to put that much energy into an animal, put that much energy into a prolific species, you know, something that you know is going to thrive in your care and do well. To me, again, it's just my opinion. You guys can all call me a clown for it, but to proliferate a deleterious gene or trait, to try and just say, I did it, I got it to breed, I got it to grow up to be an adult. It's like, all right, you proved that you got to be adult, and maybe it bred and had one slug, but you could have put all that time and energy into a really good locality boa, you know, project, or a really good pastel boa project, something where you're selectively breeding for color or trait or whatever it may be. So it's just not worth it to me to put that much time and energy. Now, scoria, you're right. People are bypassing their handicap with their looks, but it's never going to go away. You know, it's going to be there forever. It's part of their gene. You're not breeding it out, no matter what you do. And I'm afraid that if you keep adding more and more traits to it, it may compound over time.
Absolutely. That's probably why we're seeing more issues with spider.
Right.
Spiders. Nobody complained about any neurological issue in spiders when they were bred into pastel or bred into, you know, the handful of genes that were available at the time. They were really super common trait. People were spending, what, 18 grand on them?
Right.
You know, it was only whenever they got them into their 75 trait animal that these things are rolling around on the floor.
Right.
You know, it's due to this compound effect of deleterious, because mutations are not necessarily deleterious in terms of affecting the animal, but many of them can have an effect on the animal.
Right.
Because it creates a really interesting pattern on the outside, means it's also doing stuff on the inside.
Right. And that you can't see.
Right. Distribution of pigment, that's involved in lots of other aspects, right? It can lead to reproduction issues, it can lead to neurological issues and so on. So when you add all of these essentially broken traits to each other, you can make an animal that's not really ultimately long-term going to do well.
Yeah. And this is scientifically proven. It's not like our opinion. We've already seen it. It's done. So, and again, I'm not saying that it's bad to try and mix these traits to see what you get. Everybody wants to see what they can make differently, to say, look what I made, which is great. But if you're going to do that, do it smart. You know, be a scientist. Start thinking about genetics and genes and how they work. Don't just throw shit together hoping you make something that's like the new and improved, or the new wacky boa, whatever you want to call it, you know. Do something that's going to create a result. It might take 2 generations or 3 generations to get to your result, but put the time in, you know. Stop messing around, you know.
No. You know, I think the person who bred that super motley and posted about that super motley, I think that was, because he was told he couldn't do it.
Right.
So he wanted to prove he could do it. The outcome wasn't really a great outcome, but he still proved he got to that point that everybody told him he couldn't get to because they weren't going to live long enough. And he did it. Now, mind you, I think that's the only time I've ever seen a litter from a super motley, because there was only one guy either motivated enough to do it, or he was one of the few guys that even got it to go to breeding size where he was even able to do it.
Do you not remember years ago, I think you were at the same Daytona show, Tom Burke had a super motley Nicaraguan T positive on his table. That thing was fucking terrible looking.
Yeah.
You know, it was absolutely terrible looking. You know, the likelihood that ever grew up to an adult is negligible.
We were also in a time of the hobby where we saw do you remember the breeding picture was a super Aztec on a female? It might have been a female Aztec. Everything about the cage was perfect, but the male's head was flipped like all the way back and like touching his spine, like with his nose, while locking the female. Different times, man. I will say the hobby has come a long way. I will say that we are self-policing and we have a lot of genes to play with, that people aren't necessarily going after things like that. But
I mean, think about this for a second. You get all these people that are buying animals and they're spending all this time online learning about viruses and diseases. Now, if you really wanted to, you can find a virus and a disease in anybody's genetic makeup, any human, any animal. You're going to find a virus. You're going to find it. So if you're looking for viruses, you're going to find something. Why aren't these people looking into educating themselves on genetics and understanding, the breeding of snakes. There's one thing, my point being is like they're putting all this time and effort into worrying about it has AIDS or it has COVID, I'm equating, human diseases with reptilian diseases. It has NIDO, it has IBD, it has this. Why don't you look into the genetic traits and how they work instead of being so cautious about, these viruses that are present, no matter what way you look at it, they are there, It's just that unhealthy animals, these diseases take over. It's no different than cancer in a human being that's stressed out constantly, just stressed. If there's cancer cells in their body, they're going to divide and take over. It's no different than an animal. If it has viruses in its body and it's neglected and just stressed out and kept too dry and too hot, whatever virus it has is going to take over. And then people will say, "Oh, that animal had a virus." Don't deal with those people anymore. Get into educate yourself on genetics.
That's fair. I think that's great advice, honestly.
Yeah.
So we're going to do this as our little closeout, and this is just an opinion. So IBD was going to be the end of boa constrictors. It was known to be in some big collections back in the day, collections that honestly put a lot of mutations in the industry and passed around a good bit over the years. I know IBD is not completely gone, but what happened to IBD that IBD did not take out boas, in your guys' opinion?
I think that it mutated to the common cold, no different than any other, disorder. But it's inclusion bodies in their blood cells. So it's like, I think if you just don't proliferate that problem, it's not there anymore.
Yeah, remember that a virus, the way virus evolution works, the strains and viruses evolve really rapidly.
Right.
I'm not sure whether adenovirus is a DNA or an RNA virus. I should look that up. Probably a DNA virus. But there's a lot of these lack the mechanisms for repair, so they mutate frequently, and the mutations are not repaired. Whenever our cells mutate, there's a way for those to generally fix those mutations and repair them before they, move on. But with viruses, that's not always the case, which is why if you look at an evolutionary tree of viruses like COVID, for example,
right,
it's this massive network of different variants. But look at COVID's a great example. The initial strains of that were really deadly.
Right.
They wiped a lot of people. If we get it now, it's very, very rare that it would kill us. And that's only in the space of 4 years.
Right.
But they've also, therefore, things like arenavirus. It's very possible that just over time, and I've been hearing about arenavirus for 20 something years.
Right.
It's very likely that strains that existed, due to natural evolution, we've now seen these weaker strains and weaker strains. Yeah,
they've mutated out.
Mutations can arise that could freaking switch it on again and to make it really bad. But the other thing is a lot of people are more careful with quarantine as well. Yeah. Not ball python breeders, but a lot of boa breeders are very careful with quarantine.
Ball python breeders don't give a shit.
No. You just got to put them all in a box, in a bucket to start off with.
So here's the other thing that a lot of boa breeders don't understand too. Now, I keep with what I would call a closed facility, meaning I haven't gotten boas from people. If I do, I get them from a friend I know, like Dave, or somebody I know is going to give me something that's nice. And do I keep it quarantined? Yeah, I don't put it with any animals until it's breeding age. So I'll have it for 3 or 4 years. But what I'm getting at is people will get older snakes. They'll amass a collection from multiple sources, say 10, 12, 15 different places. And they'll want to breed them right away, or they'll put them together that year. And what they're calling, what they're doing is what I call is creating a viral soup. All creatures, like I said, have viruses. Every one of them has viruses. And I know this from, I have koi. I keep a koi garden. And I belong to a koi club. And to make a long story short, in the koi club, people used to trade koi. They don't do that any longer. Because what was happening is your koi pond has koi that have been living with their own viruses for 10, 15 years that they got from wherever they were produced in Japan. You mix them with koi from another koi garden where the breeder got their fish from, let's say, there's a lot of breeders in Israel. You mix those fish together, they're perfectly fine in their own world. You put them together and they're mixing, viruses or bodily fluids somehow because they're living in the same water chemistry, and they can't live with the viruses each other have, and the whole place, all the fish die. A similar thing happens with snakes. If you're mixing so many snakes from different places and there's so many different types of viruses, you're just creating a genetic, well, a viral soup that these viruses can mutate and get a stronghold on an animal and eventually kill it. So I always tell people, if you're gonna start with boas, start with babies, keep them separate from everybody their whole lives until their breeding age, and then you'll know what you have in your collection. If there's any viruses that are detrimental to their health, they're going to pop up. You'll see them. If they're not, then breed them to each other. Like I keep all my races together. All my locality boas are kept with each other. I'm not going to mix localities because those animals evolved in different localities in the world. Why would I mix them together? So I'm not saying I'm the perfect guy and I figured it out. I didn't. But I'm saying to decrease your odds in having issues with viruses in your collection, start with young animals, raise them up, and only keep them with their like-minded species.
Yep. I'm in that spot myself. I talk about it a lot, but my new building split in 2 buildings, and before that, there was the house and the building. We do have our breeding stock in one building, and then I keep this next gen in another building. They typically don't get mixed until they're adults, if there's even going to be any mix. But like I said, it was a little hodgepodge for a while there. So like I've always been a little extra on making sure. But no, all my babies are in the front half, and all my adults are in the back half. And I've always done it that way. And my next gen is all in the front half. My breeding stock that's 10 plus years old, all in the back half. Just because I like to be overcautious. The reality is we've all run into stuff in the hobby, and it really makes you change the way you think about it. I think that's one of the biggest disservices people have when they're mentoring a new breeder is a lot of people avoid the dirty talk like viruses, and they just talk about all the fun stuff. I honestly, when I talk to people now, those are some of the first conversations I have because those were not conversations had to me in the beginning of the hobby.
Right.
But
as a ball pattern breeder, what you need to do is start educating people into using the right genetic term, right? Incomplete dominant or dominant, and also the term quarantine. And quarantine is not, I had it for 3.5 hours and it's fine. Quarantine is 6 months or a year, and it's healthy. So maybe you can be the gospel according to Dave.
After this conversation, I think everyone's going to know not to ask me for advice anymore and just call you guys because, I'm over here trying to reinvent the wheel for no reason when there is a certain way of doing things. But, I'm working the way I work for whatever reason I work that way. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. These conversations, I think next time we talk, the three of us, I'll either wear a dunce hat or I'm going to dress up like a clown. I'm not sure which one it's going to be, but I'm going to pick one or the other.
Well, Dave, on that note, I got to get out of here because I got to go and pick up my kids from camp.
We're all in the same boat. Well, again, honestly, we've been talking about doing this for a couple months. I'm really glad we made time for this morning. And I think we'll do this again sometime if you guys want.
Good. Absolutely. Good. Dave, I'll see you at the Southeast show.
Yeah, so we'll be chatting
for the first time ever in my snake breeding career.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, it's going to be a fun weekend. I hype it up a lot, not just because I like Bob. Honestly, when you walk in the building, your experience from parking, the organization, everybody around you, you're going to have a great time, I promise.
Love it. Right, I'll see you then. Ben, it was great talking to you again. I'll talk to you again soon.
Man. Take it easy.
All right.
All right, man.
All right, later, Vin.
All right, take care.
Everybody, we know the rules. It's the end. Like and subscribe. Show you give a shit. It means a lot. MJ's never reported back on these numbers, but I'm sure somebody's hitting the button. But see you guys next week. I'm gonna just leave.